You were not here yesterday. I see there are a lot of different faces. So I must tell you in a few short sentences what we're doing. The Vox Humana project is an attempt to preserve the people who make movies. The people, I would say, because there are so many organizations in the world today who preserve films or restore films and write all the writings about film. There's a whole lot of work being done to make sure that the works are seen. But nobody's doing anything to preserve the people who make the films. And this project attempts to do that by talking to these people so you can hear their living voice. The voice is really the most personal thing that we have. In a way, I think the voice is more personal than the way we look, because we tend to adjust our looks to the situation in which we find ourselves. We make ourselves up, or we comb our hair, or whatever women do, and men do. But we're not used to hiding the voice. So what you hear me use now is the voice that I've always had, and which, when I die, you can hear if you go to the archive of Vox Humana, and where you will hear the voice of Monte Hellman as well. Acquaintance with your work was when Jack Nicholson came to Rome, where I was then living, and you say it was 1964, and hey, hello latecomer. Anyhow, you get the best.
Look at that, 3 people told me 3 different places.
You see, Radka?
I see.
You see? I was complaining that nobody knew about this place, and anyway, Jack Nicholson came to Rome with 4 movies. Nobody had ever heard of Jack Nicholson. He was a film producer at that time, and he wanted to sell these movies. And there were movies that had been made by Monte Hellman. So I think The Shooting was one of them. And Black Top.
No, not so early, no. I don't know. We had 2 together with, that he would have been selling, The Shooting and Ride in the Whirlwind. I can't imagine what others, because we didn't really have any proprietary interest. We did 2 other pictures in the Philippines together, Back Door to Hell and Flight to Fury, but I can't imagine that he was trying to sell those.
Now, I'm not going to give you a list of the films that he's made, because you can easily get that on the internet, but I'll read you another list, which is much more interesting. And this is the following, in what he has been involved. As editor on 17 films, as a producer on 8 films, as a writer, it says here 3, but I'm sure you've written more than 3 films, as an actor in 3 films, as a second unit director or assistant director in 3 films, as an editor in 3 films, and then there's something that says self, 14 films. I think that proves, obviously, that you've been self in all of these.
I used to be the fastest, editor alive on the upright moviola. Excuse me.
35 mil.
And 35 mil, and usually standing with my foot on the pedal.
Sure.
And
screen this size.
A tiny screen. And but since the advent of computer editing, I'm not so fast at that, and so I wanted someone to be my hands on the computer, and so there's this wonderful editor I now know who was a protege of mine, and I encouraged her to study editing and to become an editor. In addition to being a director, she had a master's from the Sorbonne in directing, and she went back and took a second master's in editing at the Sorbonne, which is very difficult. There's only 5 people a year that are taken into these programs. And then she started doing a little bit of editing, and I asked her to come and be my assistant in Los Angeles. She's from France. And she arrived, and we looked at the footage for 3 days, and we discussed, which moments would be in the movie, and I would say 98% of the time we agreed completely. And I don't know why, but I suggested to her that she put together a first edit of one sequence. And I saw what she did, and I said, "It's yours, you take over." And it's the first time I've ever done that.
And you don't regret it?
I should tell you her name, which is Céline Ameslan.
And you don't regret it?
I don't regret it because I found out that I thought I was a really good editor, but she's better. I mean, the editing is in your head, and that doesn't change, but the technology changes it slightly in the sense that on an upright moviola, you have a break, and you take your hand and you stop the film, and it's very precise. With digital editing, it's a button, and it's for some reason there's 3 or 4 or maybe 8 frames delay. It could be as much as 8 frames, which doesn't seem like a lot. We're talking about a third of a second, but that third of a second makes a big difference when you're trying to get a precise editing point. Because
it's an enormous difference.
In a third of a second, your hand can go from here to here if you're making a gesture. One of her major contributions was bringing a fresh eye. I knew the story very well, and she was able to see what elements would be confusing to an audience, and she helped to clarify it. The script was much more. I mean, the movie's very confusing. People, enjoy it. They have a great time, but they don't know what they've seen. They come out and say, "What was that?"
I read that.
But she was able to clarify it to the point where they at least could enjoy it and come out and say, "What have I seen?" Whereas before, it was like a jigsaw puzzle.
This is a movie about movie making.
Yes.
So movie making is your life, is it?
Movie making is my life, yes.
How did it happen?
Well, the writer is Steve Gatos, who's one of my oldest friends, who's an editor at Variety, and he claims. I mean, we've worked on a number of projects together. He has written or co-written half a dozen movies for me. 3 of which I guess have been made, and he claims that these were all adaptations or at least rewrites of somebody else's work, and he claims that he's submitted to me a dozen ideas over 40 years' time, none of which I liked, and he claimed this is the first time he's ever submitted an idea to me that I accepted. Oh, how do I get involved in movies? Not in just this project. I didn't understand. I'm sorry. I think it was my dream. I think from the time I was really young, but I didn't dare to dream it because when I grew up, there was a myth, and I don't know how realistic it was, but I think there must be some basis to it, that you had to be born into that business, that you had to have parents or relatives of some kind who would give you a ticket into becoming a filmmaker. Before I was a director, I was a film editor, and that was a difficult ticket. You had to get into the union, and then you had to wait. Once you were in the union, you had to wait 8 years before you were allowed to edit. And it didn't matter whether you worked in the union during those 8 years. You had to join the union, which I did, and then I went off and directed plays, waiting for my time. But the directors' union, if you're hired to direct a movie, you're automatically taken. But no, I didn't dream about being a film director. And so my second choice was to direct in the theater, which I started out to do. I don't know if I've ever told an actor how to act. The only thing I tell actors is what Sam Fuller taught me, which is don't act.
Don't act.
Don't act. Yes, that's the the famous story with Robert Stack. He asked Sam how he wanted him to act in House of Bamboo, and he said don't.
As far as I remember, and I haven't seen all of them. Somehow, films about the people that were in them, so I understand now from what you say that you tell be yourself. That's probably why I get this feeling, and I personally appreciate that a lot. And I'm also happy with Gary Cooper, but you never lose yourself in the Gary Cooper film. To the extent that you can lose yourself in a film by Jean Rouch or by Bellatar, you're never removed from the fact that this is there and you are here. These actors, these kind of actors, they create, while you can identify, they create distance. Whereas your method, I think, doesn't do that.
Well, I'm not sure. I think maybe Gary Cooper's not a great example, but every great movie star creates a persona that becomes who he is, and maybe it's not exactly being themselves. I don't know any of us who can be ourselves really, because it takes a lot of knowledge to be yourself, but. Cary Grant used to say, when people would say, "Oh, I always wanted to be Cary Grant," I said, "Me too," because it was a character that he created that became him. But then he lived that character the rest of his life. I teach directing at California Institute of the Arts, but the first thing I tell my students is number one, that they're paying a lot of money for very little, because directing is not something that can be taught. And but then I teach them the few things that can be taught, which don't really need much. And it's very simply, it's the same thing I tell actors. If you want to direct, don't. Most of the good directors don't direct actors. They hire people who are capable of doing what they do. And as Clint Eastwood said very appropriately, how could I tell Morgan Freeman how to act? He said it would be absurd. So you hire the person who can play the part, and you let them do their job.
Have you ever been fired from a movie?
I have been fired from a movie, yes.
And who would do something like that?
It was a producer named Michael Carreras, who had a company called Hammer Films. Mm-hmm. And I was hired to direct a movie called Shattered in Hong Kong. And I worked for about 3 weeks, and it was supposed to be probably supposed to be a 3-week shoot. But what happened was, it was a co-production with the Shaw Brothers. And the Shaw Brothers had a big studio in Hong Kong, and the studio operated 24 hours a day. And they had a crew that worked around the clock on 3 8-hour shifts. And what happened was, because we were from, another part of the world, we weren't really, residents and knowledgeable about the system. Our crew decided to sleep on our shift, and so I would get there at, reasonable time early in the morning, and nothing would be ready, and you know, people would be slowly waking up, and by noon maybe we would get a shot, and maybe not until 2 in the afternoon, and by then my lead actor was already drunk, and so that slowed us down. And, it was bad timing. It didn't work very well at all. And somehow the producer used that as an excuse to fire me, the fact that we were behind schedule. But the reality was he fired me because we had a disagreement about how to treat actors. And we had a black actor who objected to some of the things in the script that were kind of discriminatory, and I agreed with him, and the producer got upset because I agreed with the actor and didn't force him to do certain things that he didn't want to do. I had been fired once before that, actually. No, I take it back, I was fired once after that. I was fired again off of a TV show by an actor who was the star of the show. And it was almost the same situation, that he was directing it. He would kind of push me aside and he would start directing. And Elisha Cook was one of my actors, and he came over to me and he kind of whispered, just, you know, don't worry about it, take the money and run. But I couldn't do that. Not that I wasn't willing to do that, but the actor finally just, you know, said, we don't need your services for the rest of the show.
You've made a lot of movies, and they're all movies that are not like movies that usually come from LA. There's always something extra in them, some sort of a dimension that sets them apart as a Monte Hellman movie. Can you define that certain something?
I think that, you know, what I'm trying to do usually is make what I think of as kind of studio Hollywood A movies on a Z movie budget, but the specifications are vastly different. You know, a Z movie is supposed to be such and such, and an A movie is supposed to be such and such, and so I'm making frequently movies where the producer thinks it's going to be an exploitation picture, and in my mind I'm making, you know, Gone with the Wind or whatever. I don't know.
So there isn't a red thread going through your work?
I don't think so. I mean, it's just, you know, the only thing that I can say that I do is when I'm allowed to do it, is to take a script that I am hired to direct and sometimes throw it completely away and cause to be created something that is more to my taste. So.
You've done that a lot?
I've done that a lot, you know, almost every, well, except for the 2 Westerns with Jack Nicholson when we started with a blank page. But when I'm hired to direct a movie like China 9, Liberty 37, or like Iguana, or like Better Watch Out, I frequently, I think in every one of those cases I threw away the script and we created a new script. And Two-Lane Blacktop, I'm sorry, I forgot the first one, yeah. You're
not starting out with some crazy notion and you're trying to realize it, but that in the doing, would that correspond to your own feeling?
Well, I mean, it's just, it's almost like starting from scratch. It's almost like the Westerns, because when you throw the first script away, then you only hold on to one idea. In Two-Lane Blacktop, we held on to the idea of a cross-country race. We changed all the characters. GTO, the Warren Oates character, was 4 college kids in a convertible. So 4 people became 1 person, but not the same person as any one of those 4 people. It was a totally different character. I consider myself the equivalent of a conductor of an orchestra. I don't think that directing, contrary to the auteur theory, is a creative job. It's an interpretive job. And
what's the difference? been creative in interpreting?
Well, I mean, I start with hopefully a score by Beethoven or Bach, and I interpret that. But it's subject to a lot of interpretation. But I don't set out to write a symphony. There is I think that the process is a creative process. I think if you start with if you start with Shakespeare, and once you get involved with that, or if you start with Samuel Beckett, there certainly is creativity in that interpretation. I'll give you that.
I mean, when you did Godot, how did you dress the actors? Did you dress the actors, or did you have somebody else dress them?
No, the actors told me how to do it, because the actors were not actors. They were vaudeville comedians who did not consider themselves, how do they put it? They didn't consider themselves legitimate. They used to say this was the first legitimate play they'd ever done, because vaudeville and musical comedy were not considered legitimate. And they knew, they could read the Beckett stage directions and know what kind of routine it was. It was all based on vaudeville. And the script says they exchange hats. And they would say, oh, we know that routine. And they would show me what the routine was with the exchanging hats. And it's a vaudeville routine. So Beckett was writing vaudeville.
I think one of the major drawbacks of making movies, as juxtaposed to writing symphonies, is that people usually see movies only once. And even if they do see it more than once, it's always the same movie. Where with the symphony, you have the chance of it every time being a different movie, a different symphony.
Yeah, I don't think it's this. I don't think it is the same movie. I've seen Stagecoach maybe a half a dozen times. I've seen Spirit of the Beehive maybe 25 times. I've seen What Time Is It There maybe 8 or 10 times. Every time I see these movies, I see something different. I see it's a different experience for me. And one of the gratifications for me is some of my movies, some people feel obliged to see repeatedly, and they do see something different each time, and it becomes a different experience. And sometimes when I've seen Stagecoach, I think, what did I see in that? I felt it was, in my mind, it was overrated. And the next time I see it, I think it's the greatest film I've ever seen. It just changes, constantly changes. This movie that I just made, which I hope some of you will see tomorrow night, is the first time that I've ever accepted the collaboration to the extent that I did this time. I think everybody who makes movies is a control freak. For some reason, I decided this time to kind of get everybody to participate in a collective, unconscious or subconscious experience, and try to shut off our brains and let things happen without our thinking about them. It was amazing how some people would accept it, almost instantly, and others would resist it and not accept it for a day or several days, and then slowly begin to get into this kind of collective unconscious. And extraordinary things happened. The script became, it morphed. It became something different from what it started out to be. and not in any deliberate way, but just in a very subtle way. I mean, we said all the lines, we didn't rewrite the script, but there would be little tiny additions or changes, and then sometimes major things like the day we shot the final scene in the movie. The script had had directions for an ending that would have made the movie a kind of black comedy. And literally, when I got on the set that morning, I started to change my idea about that. And I thought of something to change. There was supposed to be a magazine that the actor picks up and looks at, and then we photograph a photograph on the front page of this magazine. And I threw that out, and I remembered a photo that I had taken of our lead actress 2 years earlier. And fortunately, it was on my computer. And I went to the computer, I found it. I did about 10 minutes of Photoshop on it, nowhere near enough time, but just a rough Photoshop. Like I say, I tried to do as little consciously as possible, but there was one thing that I did do consciously, and that was I took a shot that was literally one sentence in the script, and I shot a 14-minute take, and of which we kept about 4 or 5 minutes. And so we have this one shot that becomes 5 minutes on the screen, and it's almost the first shot in the movie. And I did that because I wanted to tell the audience, this is not a music video. I want you to just relax and let this movie happen and don't rush things. Now, the rest of the movie moves at a normal pace, but we have this one shot whose sole purpose is to get everybody to slow down. I have to confess that I have an element to my personality which is sadistic. And what I like to do, and I just became addicted to this early on. I mean, the first play I ever directed was Night Must Fall, which is a story of a serial killer who cuts people's heads off and carries them around in hat boxes. And there is a moment in that play which is a shock moment, where the audience literally is lifted off their chairs. They're so instantly shocked and terrified. And I used to love to watch the audience do that every night. I think that was one of the greatest pleasures I ever had. It's better than sex. Frequently in my movies, I try to recreate that. I try to do things to scare the hell out of people.
So you really talk to the audience slyly somewhere underneath it all in the film.
Yeah. It's just it's the thing I'm least proud of, but it's because it's not part of this subconscious thing. It's a conscious act of creating an effect, and it's I have an addiction to it, and I do it a couple of times in every movie. But for the most part, I can do the other thing.
Consciously, it's probably rare, but subconsciously, it's probably present all the time.
I can't comment on that.
I don't mean the sadistic part. I mean the part of talking to the audience somehow underneath it all in a more communicative way where it's between the director and the audience through the film. But it's more than just showing them the film. There's also another underground type of approach where you are more or less seducing them.
Well, I think that there are two parts to, well, the normal work of a theater director. A theater director has to have much more control over performance than a film director, and that's because the thing that film directors do after the fact, which is to edit, has to be included in the performance in the theater. You can't create the timing after the fact. It's not a separate part of the process. So in theater, you have to give direction to the extent that you have to make sure that the timing is correct. And so if the actor doesn't do it instinctively, you have to find a way to, I mean, it's one simple technique in theater is picking up cues. It's one actor beginning to speak almost before the other actor finishes speaking. And it can't seem rushed. It has to be very calm, but you have to just suddenly, it's like music. You have to come in on the beat. You have to know what that beat is, and you have to begin speaking as if it were relaxed, as if you were spending all the time thinking about it. But the timing has to be precise. In film, it does not, because you do that through editing.
Is editing a fixing?
Editing what now?
Is editing a form of fixing?
No, it's not. It's just part of the process of creating timing. Now, sometimes if you do a long take where the actors speak back and forth quite a bit of time, then you have to do the same thing as in theater. You have to do this thing of picking up cues. But sometimes you can create that. I mean, many times in Road to Nowhere, we have places where the actor starts to talk before the other actor is finished, where he interrupts the other actor in the middle of a sentence. And we did that in the editing. We did not do that on the set.
It's become a common usage on television to do that. I thought they do it to save time. But of course, in real life, it happens all the time, depending on the country you live in. At the moment, I live in Germany, where in real life it doesn't happen. People wait until you finish talking. But before that, I lived in Italy, where it doesn't happen all the time. It is life. You know, three people talk at the same time all the time if you're with three people. But in movies, you can adjust what the audience perceives through your intelligence. So when you have a cut where you, in the editing, then arrange for it to overlap, it's a form of fixing. In other words, fixing in the good sense. In other words, you can shoot and make your movie, then you have your rough cut, and then you do this layering to your final product. To what extent does that you do that on the basis of what you think may be the reaction of the people who will see it?
That movies, even more than theater, are, I think, movies are more like music than they are like theater. I think movies are a kind of music, and so that becomes part of the process of a piece of music.
Orchestration.
Orchestration.
You think about that when you start shooting? How you will orchestrate it?
No, I don't. And even in the editing process, a lot of what happened was out of the subconscious. The picture went through a lot of morphing during that process, as much as it did during the process of shooting it. The movie is a genre movie. It's a film noir, but every movie I do is about relationships, and it's really about the difficulty of intimate relationships. And I was trying to express, my feelings about that difficulty, and to try to move the audience to feel a nostalgia for the ideal that is never realized in any relationship.
What is the difficulty of intimate relationships in today's world?
It's not a question of today's world. I think it's probably always existed. I just think it's, I think the aspect of it that I deal with, because it's the one that's most personal to me, is the conflict between, and I think my movies are all, based on, from the point of view of the man, even though I make movies about very strong women. From the point of view of the man, it's the conflict between work and love, and trying to resolve this impossible thing to resolve.
Why is it impossible?
Because they're at odds with each other. I mean, the relationship demands a kind of complete submission to it, and the work takes you someplace else.
Hearing under what you're saying, that the productivity and the mission is the man's world and love is the woman's world, or am I simplifying?
It may be simplified. I think I'm just trying to think of some of my movies where the woman might have a mission as much as the man. Certainly in The Shooting, that's true. It's her mission. So I think his becomes a more passive occupation, in the sense that he's trying somehow to prevent her from completing her mission.
Would the combination of mission and love then be a recipe for human relationships?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think that you...
If two people pursue the same aim, the same mission, they can love each other very well.
Yes, but that's maybe in an ideal situation, but I don't know how that would work. I think if two people have... I think that the problem is everybody has an individual mission, which is to create a kind of personal immortality through achieving some kind of creative goal. I think a woman ideally can do this through childbirth, and a man somehow needs something else. But if a woman has a man's goal of creating a work of art, say, and a man in that relationship with this woman has that same goal, that's going to be an obstacle to their becoming together.
I mean, if they're pursuing the same thing?
No, because they're each pursuing their own immortality.
Oh, but if they're different pursuits? Yeah,
it's got to be. It has to be, because we're all separate in our own shells, trying to, create this personal immortality.
And if they were doing the same pursuit, they wouldn't be in your movie.
It wouldn't be my movie. That's right.
Mission is a big word, of course, and you say that man has a feeling of having to, you use the word create.
Oh, well, I mean, create.
In other words, make something outside of yourself.
Yeah, to create or to achieve a kind of, in the case of Tulane Blacktop, to find perfection. This, it may not be a creative thing. I don't know if driving a car is a creative activity, but it's like a sport. It's like personal best. It's personal best.
Driving a car is practically the only thing left in the world that we can do by ourselves.
Right.
without necessarily being controlled by some outside factors except some traffic laws. Tell me something about picking actors. Once you have them, you tell them be yourself, but you have to first find somebody to whom you, of whom you expect to be able to say be yourself. In other words, you have an idea of the self.
Well, I think what happens is I frequently begin by trying to find somebody who represents for me the embodiment of the character from the page, because initially I become attracted to a script and I try to find a way to interpret the script through performers, to find an actor who will become, in my mind, it's the opposite of what I said, but to find an actor who will become the embodiment of this character. But what happens is I find an actor who's interesting and I throw all that out, and then I say, well, I'm going to change my idea about this script because this actor is so interesting. The actor is more interesting than any character on the page. So I will then subvert the concept of the character to coincide with the actor, because that's really what I'm interested in.
You know, putting things on film, in a way, is like the brain. Putting things in the brain is also a form of recording that which has gone on. And in that sense, to have a record of what you have seen by having made a number of movies, obviously you've also captured the things that have been in your past, the important ones that you were concerned with. So when you look at do you look at your films, your old films sometimes?
Not too often. After the film is made, what interests me is the audience, and so sometimes if I go, my movies are, shown, lots of film festivals, and I travel a lot. I'll frequently go in and watch the last 10 minutes, not to see the movie, but to see the reaction of the audience.
I know a lot of film directors who never go to see their movies, the ones that they have made, simply because they're the past. Because they feel that to create a work is to finish with that idea, and to go on in your life means to go beyond those ideas. And that therefore a film made, like a painting painted or a symphony written, is really not where you are at the moment. If you're a creative person and you're in the world and you're alive and feeling, then really, in essence, film festivals shouldn't exist, because you're not interested in what you've already done, you're interested in what you're going to be doing. Or is that wrong for you?
No, I'm interested in what's happening at the moment, and for me, it's this film I've just finished. And what excuse me, what interests me is the difference between cultures, in seeing how different cultures react to the movie. And what's fascinating about this movie is audiences in Latin countries, Latin language countries, Italy, Spain, Portugal, South America, France somewhat, respond well to the movie. People in England, Germany, I guess...
Norway, Sweden.
I haven't been there, I haven't seen
Scotland,
it.
Ireland.
Yeah. But so far, the reaction is terrible, terrible. I think we've gotten maybe 90% bad reviews from English, maybe 70% bad reviews from German. However, I expected that in America, and for some strange reason, it hasn't happened. There's a kind of compilation of reviews in a website called Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know if you're all familiar with it. We have a Rotten Tomatoes score of 83%, and they haven't yet brought into the system 4 rave reviews that we're waiting for them to add, which would give us about 90%. And this is so far beyond anything, even in France, where we did, got really good reviews. I would say it's only about 40% good reviews, and I can't understand it. I don't know why in America. The only explanation that I can think is that they're not really people who are used to thinking for themselves, and I think that the fact that we got such good reviews, out of Italy, and out of France, and out of Portugal, I think because the reviews start to seem like they're quoting from each other. I think in America, maybe they're afraid to say something bad because they don't want to seem foolish, and so they quote from these other. I don't understand it. I can't imagine why we should have such a good percentage in America.
I saw a film about Roger Corman yesterday, and he said that filmmaking in Hollywood was sort of gay, and if you can take advantage of it and gamble, then you can make a history out of it. So if you could describe this game and its rules, what is it like?
I don't know. I mean, I think that it's very difficult to get movies made that are not almost computer generated. There's a certain idea that, well, you take a studio like Disney. They have people who create a formula based on like the ideas in works like The Myth of the Hero. I forget the name of the author of all this stuff about mythology, but they've taken some of these ideas and formulated them in a kind of a guidebook to screenwriters, and so it becomes a formulaic thing. Joseph Campbell, thank you. And so that becomes the way that they want their movies created. There are also people who write guides to screenwriting. There are screenwriting teachers who have a kind of formula for that, whereas certain things have to happen by the end of the first act, second act, whatever. I don't pay any attention to any of that, for better or worse, and maybe it's why my movies don't always work. But I think the one thing that people consistently say about my movies is they don't know where they're going to go. They don't know how it's going to end, and I like that. They're not formulaic.
Do you hate the fact that movies have to end?
I don't end my movies. I don't have an end. I don't have a beginning, and I don't have an end. I start somewhere in the middle of life, and I end it somewhere in the middle of life. I think movies that end with the hero dying or getting married are artificial. As we know, marriage is not the end. You can have divorce and then marriage again and then another divorce and so forth. I love the fact that it's because this is my process. When I go to a movie, I begin to dream the movie, mixing it with my own dreams. And so I frequently, when I exit a movie theater, can't tell you what I've just seen because it's so mixed in with my own dreams. And I hope to kind of help the audience in that same process. So I love it when people see my movies and they have completely different ideas of what it is they've seen.
You want him to see your own dreams, but they've already have a maybe fixed PR relationship as to what the audience should dream. How do you work out that to get your movie made?
Well, I mean, luckily, even in the worst of my experiences, I've been able to at least put down, you know, on film my dream. And sometimes a producer will then come in and recut the movie and to fulfill, you know, to fit his ideas. And in every case that that's happened, sometimes it takes years, but sometime down the road it will get put back. Because some exhibitor or some video distributor sees the value of the original concept, wants the director's cut, so to speak.
Or a festival.
Well, the festivals can't really, you know, go back and create an original version.
No, but they have a market. They create a market.
Yeah.
Could you demand final cut at the...
I've only had final cut once, and it was just a result of that particular period of time when the studios didn't really understand what was happening. They thought that there was some mysterious thing that filmmakers knew that they wanted to discover. So I had final cut on 2-lane blacktop. But a lot of my movies have been recut. Roger Corman recut Cockfighter. The Italian producer recut Iguana, but they were all put back. They were all, you know, reformed into the original director's cut.
So you had final cut in the event.
Ultimately, I returned to the final cut. I think right now it looks like there are two audiences for my new movie. One is very young people, and the other is people over 60. The biggest theatrical exhibition of the movie so far is in a small community in the desert of Southern California, which is a retirement community. That's been our best run so far.
Which city?
It's Palm Desert.
No. Thank you.
Thank you.